It began on a night that should have been completely ordinary. A luxury hotel stood almost silent beneath the rain, its glass entrance reflecting the wet lights of the empty street outside. Inside, the lobby was quiet, polished, and still. A receptionist reviewed paperwork behind the front desk while security cameras recorded every corner of the building as they always did. There were only a few guests checked in that night, and no unusual activity had been reported. Yet sometime after midnight, one of the cameras captured something that would later unsettle everyone who saw it. A man entered the lobby, crossed the marble floor, and walked toward the elevators with calm, confident steps. But there was one problem. According to the hotel records, no one had arrived at that hour, no room had been assigned to him, and no one at the desk remembered seeing him. The footage was first reviewed the next morning during a routine check of the overnight recordings. At first, nothing seemed strange. The man looked like any other guest. He wore a dark coat, carried no luggage, and moved with the kind of ease that suggested he knew exactly where he was going. He never looked toward the front desk, and no one appeared to greet him. In the recording, he entered through the front doors without hesitation and headed straight across the lobby. There was something calm about the way he moved, almost too calm, as if he had no reason to rush because he already knew what came next. But the strange part was not his appearance, it was the fact that the receptionist on duty insisted no one had entered at that time. She swore the lobby had been empty, even though the camera clearly showed otherwise. The receptionist was called into the security office to review the footage herself. She watched it in silence, leaning closer to the monitor with visible confusion. The timestamp was correct, the angle was correct, the lobby in the video was unmistakably the same one where she had been sitting all night, yet she had no memory of the man crossing the floor in front of her desk. Even more unsettling was the fact that in the footage, she never looked up. While the man walked through the center of the lobby, only a few meters away, she remained focused on the paperwork in front of her. To the security staff, it seemed possible that she had simply missed him, but she insisted that was impossible. The lobby doors made a sound when they opened. Footsteps echoed on the floor. She should have seen him. She should have heard him. And yet, in her memory, the lobby had remained completely empty. The interior elevator camera recorded the man from above. He stood motionless in the center of the cabin, his face partly hidden beneath the shadow of his coat collar. Most guests shift their weight, check their phones, or glance at the floor numbers while riding. He did none of these things. He simply stood there, still and upright, looking toward the closed doors as if listening to something beyond them. The footage had no audio, but everyone who watched it later described the same feeling. The silence in that small space seemed unnatural. Stranger still, the elevator did not immediately move. According to the timestamp, the man remained inside for nearly 20 seconds while the doors stayed closed and the cabin remained between floors. Then, without any visible command, the elevator resumed operation. But when the system report was printed, it showed no registered passenger input and no recorded destination. The next camera should have shown the man exiting onto one of the guest floors. Instead, the footage revealed something more confusing. The elevator doors opened onto the fourth floor, but no one stepped out. The hallway remained empty for several seconds, then the doors closed again. Security reviewed the angle multiple times, slowing it down frame by frame. There was no sign that the man had left the elevator before the doors opened, and yet he was not visible inside when they did. There were no blind spots large enough to hide a person, and no technical glitch was detected in the recording. The carpeted hallway stretched in both directions, lined with identical doors and silent walls, but it contained no guest, no movement, and no explanation. It was as if the elevator had opened for someone who should have been there, but simply wasn't. By midday, several staff members had gathered in the security office to watch the recording. What had started as a curiosity quickly became a problem no one could explain. The front desk logs showed no late-night arrival. The digital key system showed no room assigned after midnight. The side entrances remained locked, and no emergency exits had been triggered. Every normal way a guest could enter the building had been checked, and none of them matched the man on the tape. Security staff began tracing his path through every available camera, hoping to find the point where reality aligned with the records. But the more they watched, the more the footage seemed to resist explanation. He appeared clearly in one place, moved logically through the building, and then vanished at the exact point where the records should have confirmed his existence. Instead, the system answered with silence. The reservation database was checked first. Every guest who had booked a room that evening was accounted for, and each name matched a valid payment record and keycard assignment. No extra booking had been added manually, no check-in had been deleted, and no cancellation had occurred during the hours in question. The manager personally reviewed the entries line by line, convinced that someone must have made a simple clerical mistake. But there was nothing. The night audit was clean. Even the temporary guest profiles created for walk-ins were absent. If the man had been a real guest, there should have been some trace of him in the system: a name, a card, a room, a note. Instead, there was only the same impossible contradiction. A man clearly walked through the lobby on camera, but according to every official record, no such person had ever been there at all. The receptionist was interviewed again, this time by management. She repeated the same account with growing discomfort. She had remained at the desk the entire time. No one had approached her, no one had asked for a room, no one had crossed the lobby floor. The manager asked whether she might have looked down for only a few seconds, long enough to miss him, but she insisted she would still have heard the door or noticed movement in her peripheral vision. The stranger had walked directly across open space in front of her, and yet her memory held nothing. What disturbed her most was not the possibility that she had somehow missed him, but the certainty she felt while watching the tape. She knew that lobby, knew that hour, knew the exact silence of that shift, and still, the man in the footage felt wrong, like something placed into reality after the fact, rather than remembered within it. Later that afternoon, staff decided to inspect the fourth floor in person. Since the elevator had opened there in the footage, it was the only destination they had. The corridor looked ordinary, with quiet carpeted floors, identical doors, and the faint smell of cleaning chemicals still in the air. But one detail caught their attention almost immediately. Room 412 was slightly open. It was not wide enough to suggest forced entry, only a narrow, dark line where the latch had failed to close completely. According to housekeeping records, the room was vacant and had not been assigned in 3 days. When the manager pushed the door open, the room appeared empty at first glance. The bed was made, the curtains were partly drawn, and no luggage or clothing was visible. Yet something about the air inside felt wrong. It was colder than the corridor, and the silence in the room seemed unnaturally deep. Inside room 412, everything looked prepared for a guest who had never arrived. The bed corners were tight, towels were folded, and the small tray of complimentary water bottles remained untouched. But the room did not feel unused. A chair near the window was pulled slightly away from the desk, as if someone had sat there recently. The bathroom light was on, even though housekeeping had logged it as off when the room was serviced that afternoon. None of these details proved anything on their own, but together they created a subtle sense that someone had entered the room and then vanished without leaving evidence behind. There were no fingerprints on the bathroom mirror, no opened drawers, no keycard entry logged in the electronic system. The room was both empty and disturbed at the same time, holding the shape of a presence without any trace of identity. The bathroom drew the most attention. It was immaculate, but that cleanliness seemed almost staged, as though the room had reset itself after being used. The sink was dry, the towels were untouched, the mirror held no steam marks or smudges. Yet one strange detail remained difficult to dismiss. The bathroom light had definitely been on. Housekeeping staff were certain of it because they had turned it off before leaving the room earlier in the evening. There was no motion sensor, no timer, and no reason the light should have activated on its own. Security checked whether maintenance had entered the room after service, but there was no such record. Standing in the bright, silent bathroom, the staff felt the same unease that had followed the footage. Nothing in the room clearly proved an intruder had been there, but almost every small detail suggested that someone had entered and left without touching the world in any normal way. The electronic lock on room 412 was then examined in detail. Modern hotel systems record every entry attempt, successful cards, failed cards, staff master keys, even maintenance access. When the printout arrived, the results should have ended the mystery. Instead, it deepened it. The room had not been opened at any time after housekeeping finished service. There was no successful guest entry, no staff override, and no forced access alert. In the eyes of the system, the door had remained closed all night. Yet when management arrived in person, it had been slightly open, the bathroom light on, and the chair moved. The lock data was one of the most reliable evidence the hotel possessed, and it directly contradicted the physical state of the room. Either the lock system had failed without reporting an error, or something had happened inside that room without opening the door in any way the hotel could detect. That evening, security reviewed the external cameras to see whether the man had ever left the building. If he had entered, crossed the lobby, and somehow reached room 412, then he must have eventually exited as well. The hotel had only 3 monitored ways out: the front entrance, the parking garage lift, and the rear service corridor.
It was an ordinary evening when viewers sat in front of their televisions, expecting nothing more than the usual programs. News broadcasts, entertainment shows, and advertisements filled the airwaves as they always did. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. The signal began to glitch. The image flickered, distorted, and then completely changed. Instead of the scheduled program, a strange figure appeared on the screen. The audio was distorted, the visuals unstable, and the entire broadcast felt unnatural. At first, many assumed it was a technical issue. But as the seconds passed, it became clear that this was not an ordinary malfunction. The figure on the screen did not resemble anything viewers had seen before. It wore a mask, its appearance both artificial and unsettling. The background flickered with patterns that made it difficult to focus. The voice that followed was distorted, shifting in tone and rhythm, making it hard to understand. It spoke in fragmented phrases, sometimes clear, sometimes completely incomprehensible. The entire scene felt chaotic, yet strangely controlled. It was as if the broadcast had been deliberately designed to confuse and disturb anyone watching. Inside the television stations, operators were just as confused as the viewers. Control rooms filled with monitors suddenly displayed the same strange signal. Technicians attempted to regain control, adjusting equipment and checking connections, but nothing worked. The signal had overridden the system completely. It was not coming from within the station. It was being transmitted from an external source. This realization raised immediate concern. For someone to interrupt a live broadcast in this way required knowledge, equipment, and precise timing. As the interruption continued, investigators later concluded that the signal must have been transmitted from a powerful source. To override a broadcast signal, the hijacker would need to send a stronger signal on the same frequency. This was not something an amateur could easily achieve. It required planning, technical expertise, and access to specialized equipment. The idea that someone had managed to take control of a public broadcast raised security and vulnerability within the system. Viewers across the region watched in confusion. Some thought it was part of a program, while others quickly realized something was wrong. The strange figure continued speaking, its movements unnatural and unpredictable. The audio fluctuated, sometimes loud, sometimes barely audible. The entire experience felt surreal. It was not just a disruption, it was something unsettling, something that did not belong on television. For those watching, the moment became unforgettable. The audio of the broadcast was as strange as the visuals. It shifted unpredictably, creating a sense of unease.